Hello, it's Phil Thatch, and today I want to take a few minutes and talk to you about a lens that I've owned for years and years. This is a lens that officially is called the AFS NIKKOR 500 f4G ED. I just call it the VR 500 f4G. That's my shorthand for this lens, but this is a exotic super telephoto lens. It's not the latest version. The latest version has an E instead of a G in the name, but this one is still relatively recent. And I bought this lens new, but these days you can get this lens fairly reasonably priced used. So let's talk about it, and I'll talk about it and also how it compares to another favorite lens of mine, the AFS NIKKOR 200 to 500 millimeter f5.6 E ED. So this lens is kind of a consumer grade lens, but a lot of professional photographers use it, and it's really, really great, and it zooms from 200 to 500. It has a continuous maximum aperture of f5.6. This one is a prime. It's always at 500 millimeters, and it can go all the way to f4, so it lets in a lot more light. But I'll talk about this lens and, like I say, how it compares to that lens and maybe some other lenses. So follow along. Got some notes. Okay, the lens came out in August of 2007, and they made 8,787 of them. Mine is number 7476 of those, so mine is pretty late in the run. I bought mine in, where'd it go? I bought mine in January of 2014 from B&H. I paid $7,999, and you can get a used one now in February of 2020 is when I'm recording this video. You can get a used one now in condition 8+, which is pretty good condition, very good condition, I would say, for $45.99.95. So quite a bit off, but the thing is still holding its value really, really well. The next version, the E version, came out in July of 2015, and those are $10,296. So I bought mine just over a year before they replaced it with the next version. That's why mine was substantially less expensive. You know, in all of these exotic super telephotos, the 400 2.8s, the 500 f4s, the 600 f4s, are around $10,000. I think you can get the Canon 600 f4 for under $10,000, but everything else is over $10,000. So these exotic super telephotos are expensive. And really, you know, at $79.99, mine is about the cheapest exotic telephoto that you can get brand new, or that you could get brand new back in January of 14 when I bought it. The 200 to 500, it came out in August of 2015, and I waited a full year. I bought mine in August of 16. I paid $13.96, and you can get them these days for about $140 less than that. What a bargain. $13.96 for this lens is an absolute steal because it is great. Okay, so let's talk about some differences between these two lenses. One of them is their size. You can see when the 200 to 500 is closed down to 200 millimeters, it is notably smaller and easier to carry. In fact, the 200 to 500 millimeter lens weighs 81.2 ounces. That's 5.075 pounds. The 500 f4G weighs 136.9 ounces. That's 8.55 pounds. It's 55.7 ounces heavier. That's 3.48 pounds heavier. And so that makes this lens difficult to handhold. And this lens at 3.48 pounds lighter is a lot easier to handhold if you're out in the wilderness, you know, especially for a long time. I recommend at least a monopod on this lens, especially a carbon fiber one. That way, if you do need to take a shot at a bird in flight, you can pick up the lens and the super light carbon fiber monopod and follow the bird across the sky. That's the way I do it usually. Another big difference is, and where the 200 to 500 comes out ahead, is minimum focus distance. You know, a lot of times what you're shooting with a telephoto lens is a long way away, And in situations like that, I would always go with the 500 f4. But quite often, especially if you're working in a blind, you can get really close to your wildlife subject. And in those situations, this one wins out because its minimum focus distance is 7.22 feet or 2.2 meters. The minimum focus distance on the 500 f4 is 12.63 feet or 3.85 meters. That's 5.41 feet more distance you have to be from your subject before this one will focus. 5.41 feet is more than Heather is tall. So that's a notable difference. So if I'm in a situation where I can get really close to my subject, I can't use this lens, but this one I can. So there's another difference. Both of these lenses are weather sealed. They both have the little rubber gasket on the back of the lens that keeps water from getting into the camera. But I trust this one way more in a rainy situation. And a lot of times when you're making photographs of wildlife, it'll be raining a little bit. Sometimes I'll ride around in the car with this thing hanging out the window, getting rained on it, and I'm not worrying about it. This one, if you've got this in the rain, although it does have the gasket back here and it's probably weather tight right here, when you've got this lens out, if rain is falling on this part and then you zoom it back in, rain's going inside the camera, and I don't like that. So anytime I'm using this in the rain, I always bring a cloth with me, and before I zoom this lens back in, I'll dry it off as well as I can. So that is another difference. As far as coating, this one does have Nikon's nano crystal coat, and this one doesn't. Supposed to help with lens flare or whatever. I haven't noticed any difference. And I had a viewer ask me about sharpness. To me, this one's just as sharp as that one. The cheap one's just as sharp as the expensive one. I'm sure somebody with better vision than me or a real serious pixel peeper could probably tell the difference. But to me, the sharpness is really about the same. I can get fantastically sharp images with this and with this. Both of them seem to work well in terms of sharpness. Let's talk about lens hoods. The hood that comes with the 200 to 500 is probably my least favorite part about this lens. It's super easy to just knock right off the lens. It does flip backward for smaller storage, which I like that, but it just seems kind of floppy, and it's maybe one of the ways that they got this lens to be so inexpensive and so great is by not spending a lot of money on the lens hood. The 500 f4 by comparison has, I think this is carbon fiber, this lens hood. It's got this screw-on device right here. This is the Nikon HK34 made in Japan. It's got like a felt lining on the inside, and it removes. This is the actual lens. Look how big the hood is, but it's extra light. I mean, this lens is really heavy, but not much of that weight is this hood, and then it can be flipped onto the lens backwards for storage. Okay, so let's talk now about the switches that are on these lenses. On the 500 f4G, it has several switches, and this is an absolutely premium lens, and the switches, you can really tell. These are really nice, high-quality switches. You got an autofocus, manual focus switch. You got a focus limiter where you can do the full length of the focus travel, or like if you're definitely not going to be focusing on anything that's close to you, you can set it to focus only 8 meters to infinity. So it won't, if it misses, it won't hunt all the way back to its minimum focus distance. So that's a nice feature. Two different VR modes. By the way, both of these lenses have vibration reduction, normal and tripod mode. And then it has these buttons around the lens barrel, and this switch controls what they do. The one I use the most is memory recall, so you can set a place that for the lens to focus on, and then you can just press these buttons and it'll go there, so you'll kind of be preset for whatever action you're expecting, which is really nice. And then there's a sounds on and sounds off switch. I always leave that off. Who wants to spook the birds with sound? And then the VR switch is actually a collar that goes all the way around the lens to turn vibration reduction on and off. So really, really nice switches on this one. Okay, so here are the switches on the 200 to 500. You got a manual and an automatic focus, focus limiter switch, just like that one, except for it's 6 meters to infinity instead of 8 meters to infinity. Vibration reduction off and on. And by the way, the vibration reduction in this lens is as good as any I've ever used. It might even be better than that one. Great VR in this lens, really, really great. And then you've got normal and sport mode for the vibration reduction. Up here there is a lock. If you're walking along with the lens pointing down, you can see it's kind of creeping out. So you can use this switch to lock it at 200 millimeters and then it stays put and doesn't creep on you. I never use that switch. If I'm carrying this lens, usually I'm carrying it like this, or I don't mind it if it's creeping out a little bit because I'm probably going to use it at 500 millimeters when I'm going to use it. So I don't use that switch too much, but it's there, so that's nice. One of the first things I remember when I brought this lens home, or when I got it off the front porch after UPS delivered it, was the difference in the feel of these switches. They're just so, I mean, they're decent switches, and I haven't had any problems with them, but they just don't feel anywhere near like the quality of the switches on the 500 f4. They work, I don't have any problems with them, but they don't feel like the super high quality switches that are on the exotic lens. Both of these lenses have built-in feet with tripod collars. A lot of people will replace the stock foot on the 500 f4G with something that's a little closer to the lens and has an Arca Swiss plate. I never have. I like the stock plate. I like this distance. It sets the camera up a little higher. Like I say, I do a lot of photography out the window of my car, and I can set this on the windowsill and it sits up a little higher and it makes it work better. Most of the aftermarket or third-party feet for this are much closer to the lens itself, and I don't think I would like that, although I've never tried one. And both lenses also have a knob that you can loosen, and then you can, you can turn the whole camera, the camera body would turn, and then you can go portrait mode instead of horizontal mode. And this one is just absolutely smooth as butter. It is fantastic. Same thing on this one, except when you loosen this, here it's kind of clunky. It's really noticeably not as good, this tripod collar on the 200 to 500 as the 500 f4. That collar is so smooth and fantastic, and this one is really bad. Great lens, works well, the collar's bad, the hood's bad, the switches are cheap. What do you expect for $13.96 on a lens that shoots this good? Okay, so let's talk about teleconverters. Both of these lenses will work with Nikon teleconverters, and that's one reason why I really like to get a genuine Nikon lens, because it'll work with Nikon teleconverters where some of the lenses from the third-party manufacturers might not work with the Nikon teleconverters, but these will. This is the 1.4 teleconverter. It's on my D500 right now. Actually, it was on. I had the D500 and the 1.4 on the 500 f4 before I started making this video. The 1.4 on the 500 f4 makes it a 700 millimeter f5.6, and it works absolutely perfectly. The images are sharp, the autofocus is fast, everything works really great. The 1.4 on the 200 to 500 makes it an f8, and it'll go to 700. It works just okay. It doesn't work great. I mean, it does function, but it doesn't work great. I like to use the 200 to 500 with its really close minimum focus distance. With the 1.4 teleconverter, if I'm chasing butterflies around in the summertime, you know, you'll catch a butterfly on a flower bloom, and you can get a really good picture with that because it has that great minimum focus distance that the 500 f4 doesn't. The next teleconverter in Nikon's line is the 1.7. That makes this an 850 f6.8. The 500 f4 turns into an 850 millimeter f6.8. It works very well. It doesn't work as good as the 1.4 or no teleconverter, but it does work. You can nail autofocus on birds in flight with it on a D500 or a camera like that, and it works really well. this teleconverter on the 200 to 500, I don't even know what its numbers are because I never use it because it just doesn't work. I mean, if you want a manual focus, it will work. But if you need autofocus, don't try the 1.7 on the 200 to 500. Okay, next is the biggest one, the 2.0 teleconverter. It makes the 500 f4 into a 1000 f8. Doesn't autofocus for birds in flight that well. I use it mostly for video, like when I'm out at the pond making videos of ducks. This combination on the Z6, this teleconverter, and the 500 f4 really works well for video. Not that great for stills. It's pretty good at minimum focus distance for stills. I made a photograph of a bullfrog one time with this on there, and it worked pretty good. But I don't know. It struggles, and of course it's virtually useless on this. So that's another difference. You know, because that's an f4 lens, it can take teleconverters better than a 5.6, because most cameras these days will autofocus all the way down to f8. So if your lens has a minimum aperture of f8, it'll autofocus. So this one has f8 with the 2, and this one has f8 with the 1.4. So that's why. It's not that there's some other problem with this lens, it's just the minimum aperture is much smaller than the f4 lens. So why is this one so much bigger and so much heavier and so much more expensive? Well, it's because it's an f4 lens. The difference between f4 and f5.6 is one stop of light. So when this one is shooting wide open, which by the way it performs magnificently wide open, you don't have to stop this lens down. When it's wide open, it lets in double the amount of light that this one will let in wide open at 5.6, and this one does pretty doggone good wide open at f5.6 also. I do find, back to teleconverters, they will work a little bit better stopped down some, especially the 1.7 and the 2.0. The 1.4 works great wide open on this. The 1.7 and the 2.0, they're a little better if you stop them down a third or 2/3 of a stop. So because this one lets in twice the amount of light, it really helps you out in areas that you need it in wildlife photography. A lot of times in wildlife photography you need a lot of shutter speed. Having twice the amount of light will let you get a lot more shutter speed. Or a lot of times you are in a situation where you might have to use a lot of ISO to get that shutter speed. Well, with this one, letting in double the light, you don't need as much ISO to get a given shutter speed. So it's big and heavy to allow it to be an f4 lens. And you know, it takes a lot of glass. Look how big that front element is. I don't know if you can see it, but it's huge. It takes a lot of glass, which is expensive and heavy, to let in that much light at this focal distance. It's just physics. That's just how it works. Okay, so now let's talk about filters. If you want to use a filter on the 200 to 500, you can screw a filter on the front. It takes 95mm filters, so I'm sure they'd be pretty expensive. I've never priced them. I've just decided to go filterless with this lens. I have used this lens a couple of times for landscape type photography, but usually this is a wildlife lens, so I don't use filters for that. Now this one, it does not have filters that go on that giant front element. It actually has a drop-in filter system. I think it's 52mm. It has one filter that's just sitting in here all the time. It's part of the optical equation of the lens, I think is how they've described it. But I actually have another filter that will drop in. It's a circular polarizer that you can drop into this lens, and then it has a little gear on it that you turn to spin the circular polarizer. I don't use it that much, but in a couple of occasions, like if I'm there's an osprey nest that I make videos of sometime near here, and if I'm not moving around all the time, where a polarizer you'd have to be constantly adjusting, if I'm pointing straight at that osprey nest, I can dial that polarizer in and get some really rich colors with it. They're pretty expensive. Those filters are pretty expensive. I bought mine used and still paid more than I've probably paid for any other filter I've ever bought. But but I'm glad to have it. You know, why not have the polarizer filter for this lens if you're going to have this lens. Another difference between the two lenses is autofocus speed. And I can't actually quantify that for you, but I can tell you that this lens focuses much, much noticeably faster than the 200 to 500. I mean, the 200 to 500 is not my slowest autofocusing lens, but if you use this for a little while and then switch to the 200 to 500, you can tell. I don't think I've ever missed a shot really because of the autofocus speed difference, but I don't know, maybe I have. But it's noticeable. This is more comparable to the autofocus speed of my 70 to 200 f2.8 VR2. Really, really fast like that, and the 200 to 500 is slower. Okay, let's talk a little bit about packaging. Strange thing to talk about when you're talking about lenses, but there's something about the packaging on the 500 f4 that I've just got to show you. But we'll start with the 200 to 500. It comes in a gold box, just like most Nikon lenses do, at least until the Z series. I think they're usually in black boxes, but it comes with a gold box with a gold stripe. Pretty standard fare, pretty big for a gold box. I think it may be the biggest gold box I have. And for storage, there's this pouch, which a lot of people just take these pouches and throw them away. But you know, if I'm going someplace and I don't have, like, there's a lot of times that there's a certain bag that I use to carry this lens, but if I'm going someplace and I'm using that bag for other things and I'm not using this lens in it, I'll put it in this pouch and, you know, pull the string so that I don't get dust all over my valuable lens. So that's how the 200 to 500 is shipped. The 500 f4 comes in this. It comes in this completely awesome case, extra sturdy. I mean, this thing is unbelievable. Now, I've never used this at all. I mean, so mine is in absolutely mint condition. Let me see if I can open it. Well, there's the inside of the case. The lens sits in here. It's just absolutely fantastic. What an amazing case. And the lens also, you know, I don't use that case. I use this. I bought this immediately. It's about $150. I think it's made by Low Pro, and it's designed to hold up to a 600 millimeter lens with a camera body on it. So I can put it in here, the 500 millimeter lens with the 2X teleconverter and a camera body, and it fits nicely. It's well padded. But that's, you know, this is my largest camera bag, and it only holds one lens. But I can carry that thing a long way if needed in that bag. So you store the lens, take the lens head off and flip it around backwards, and then tighten that back up. And then it has this storage thing, which is padded and velcroed, and it goes around the lens. And then I put that face down like that in that backpack that I showed you. I want to show you something else too. Noted, I'm sure if you're watching this, you've probably seen one of Mark Smith's videos. In one of his videos, he has the 500 f4. And in one of his videos, he wore this around for a while as a hat. So there's that. But anyway, you can tell how exotic that lens is just by this crazy case that it comes in. This lens wasn't made at the time that I bought my 500 f4, and if they were making this lens at the time that I bought my 500 f4, I probably never would have bought the 500 f4 because this lens does a lot, and it does a lot really, really well. But in the day that I bought the 500 f4, I was really searching for a genuine Nikon Supertelephoto lens, and you know, Nikon didn't have a 500 millimeter lens besides this. So, you know, I bit the bullet and bought this thing. And now that I have it, I still bought this because there's some things that this lens will do that this one can't. Like I mentioned before, the close minimum focus distance, the lightness, plus the fact that it's a zoom. You know, you can't make a 320 millimeter shot with this, but you can with this. So there's a lot of reasons to have this lens, even if you have this lens in your bag, your giant bag just because this lens does a lot of things that this one can't do. And likewise, this one does a lot of things that that one can't do. If I had to give up one, I'd probably give up this one. Hopefully I'd get some of my money back, but I'm glad to have them both. Okay, thanks for taking the time to watch this video where I talked about my two Supertelephoto lenses and how they compare. I appreciate it, and I hope you enjoyed it. If you like the content, maybe give it a thumbs up, and if you want to see some more, subscribe to the channel, maybe hit the notification bell, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one. Bye-bye.